Welcome to Season 4 of AIHA's podcast series, The Healthier Workplaces Show, where we explore timely and informative topics about occupational and environmental health and safety to help you improve your workplace. Gabrielle, David, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
It's great. It's great to be here.
Let's get started. So, Gabrielle, why did AIHA form the Thermal Stress Working Group? What does this working group hope to achieve?
Yeah, so thermal stress includes hazards on both the cold and the hot end of the temperature spectrum, but primarily and most recently, we've been focusing more so on some heat stress resources. Largely, we strive to investigate, develop, and validate tools and create resources that can benefit small businesses, employers, really in any company, independent contractors, and workers across a wide spectrum. So we're just trying to protect people from thermal stress, again, on both sides, heat and cold. And truthfully, industrial hygienists are really the perfect people to try and help implement this mission. It's part of their job to anticipate, recognize, and evaluate and control workplace hazards. So who better to help, really spearhead some initiatives for heat and cold stress safety?
Absolutely. That sounds very important and critical. David, could you tell me a little bit more about the National Commission on Climate and Workforce Health? Why was it formed and what are your goals?
Definitely. So the National Commission on Climate and Workforce Health was formed to address this unique intersection between climate risks and workforce health and businesses and employers. We saw a clear gap that climate impacts are often overlooked on people and health. A lot of organizations think about, maybe flood risks to their buildings or their operations, which are of course important, but there hasn't been a big focus on the biggest asset for most organizations, which is the people that work there. Our commission is co-chaired by former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and Susan Potter, who is Mercer, the company Mercer's U.S.-Canada president. And we also have Larry Sloan, the CEO of AIHA, on our commission as well. And we bring together all the different sectors, public, private, nonprofit sectors, to really build out research and resources and tools for companies to help recognize how climate-driven risks affect health and workforce health and what to do about it as well.
How exciting. So let's talk about the partnership between AIHA's Thermal Stress Working Group and Health Action Alliance. What are you guys doing to address these situations?
I'm happy to kick it off there. And so, as Gabby mentioned earlier, too, that her leadership and her role around both heat and cold stress is obviously a critical element of what employers need to think about as a core risk to their workforce. And so one thing that we've done as the commission is just recognizing that, employers have so much on their minds. There are economic pressures, there are worries, there are business politics, there's hiring, all these different things. And ultimately, it's these climate-driven risks and heat are not going to be the top of the radar for most organizations. And so our goal as the commission is to work with experts like Gabby and the Corey Stringer Institute and AIHI Thermal Stress Working Group to really build resources out that help employers sort of take a first step. So when they're really busy and there's a lot to focus on, what can you do this summer? What are the two things you can do this summer? How do you think about what workers are at risk? And so we've been working together, and over the next few months, we'll be releasing some resources as well with AIHA and with Gabby's team.
How exciting. According to NASA, the average surface temperature of the Earth in 2024 was the warmest on record. That doesn't sound great. What can you tell me about that? How is that a concern for businesses, industries, and such?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're correct. It's not great news. We have some data that suggests that the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of heat waves is just continuing to get worse and keep progressing. That's not everywhere around the world, but in most places where we are living and working. So unfortunately, this is the new reality for a lot of people. Think people working in these jobs, but also kids walking to school. It truthfully can affect everyone. And so you can't escape the heat, but we have to learn how to adapt to it. And so, these are the cards that we're dealt right now, and we have to learn about heat safety. We have to have things in place to manage heat stress and to just increase awareness of how we can protect ourselves and tolerate this stress better.
If I could add as well, and thank you, Gabby, for that. I think that this is so relevant for employers and businesses because this heat, as Gabby said, obviously affects workers in industries that might seem obvious, like construction or agriculture, but it can affect folks that are working from home. People don't sleep as well when it's hot outside, and so there are so many sort of hidden stressors to this The commission has done some polling recently that 55% of workers, including 2 and 3 Gen Z workers, say they already face at least moderate climate-related risks at work. I should note that's not just heat, that might be more broad around extreme weather, but the point still stands that this is something, if it's affecting 2 and 3 younger workers, that is an existential risk for labor and our economy and lots of things
Of
like that.
course.
So while it's getting hotter out there, it's important for us and our companies and our communities to adapt just as fast as the temperature is changing. And so that's why we're working together.
Okay, so let's break this down. How exactly does climate change intensify occupational risk associated with heat across all different sectors?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So, from a physiological perspective, work is challenging, even just yourself out mowing the lawn, yard work, anything of the sorts, walking around. But when we start to increase that intensity on any spectrum, it puts stress on the body. So there's some statistics out there about exactly how stressful it is. One of them that I think a lot of people can relate to is, when you're outside and you start to sweat. So you're losing your body mass through sweat. We're trying to dissipate heat out to the environment. So you can be about 1 degree Fahrenheit hotter for every 1% body mass that you lose to sweat. So that's kind of a fancy way of just saying it's really hard on your body to try and manage and to function properly, to maintain homeostasis, as we call it in science, when we have challenges. And the really unique thing about work is that we can't always stop. Jobs have to get done. We have to finish our tasks on time. A lot of people have really unique job incentives too. Sometimes maybe they're scared to speak up. And so circling back, that just brings an immense challenge that people feel stressed. We know it's very stressful on the heart, our whole cardiovascular system, our muscles, and everything. And truthfully, the only thing that we can do to really cool our body back down is to rest or to add any ice water and things along those lines to help also cool down our body temperature. But it's stressful physiologically. And the longer we work and the more intensely that we work, it's just exacerbating everything that's going on in the body.
So Gabby's the expert here, but I'm happy to add a little bit, of what we learned talking to businesses too. So there's heat affects the body in so many different ways, as Gabby mentioned, but there's sort of structural or systemic barriers also to helping protect people from it. A big one is around just education and awareness. I mean, hopefully the folks listening to this podcast are aware of how heat might be a risk to workers or a focus for industrial hygienists. But in reality, thinking about heat illness is new for most people and definitely most workers. It is much hotter now than it was when many people were growing up, and so there's an educational component to this as well. And I would the one more thing I would add, and I think this helps me sort of understand these risks, is when people think about heat stroke on a hike or something, you're hurting yourself purely because of the heat and the way your body is exerting itself. But it can affect other things. You might be more delirious. You might fall off a ladder at work. You might drop something. And so it really just exacerbates all the risks that already exist in a workplace when it's hotter.
Yeah, and David, I'm
Absolutely.
so glad you said that. It's so true. We see this in the lab, but also anecdotally. I guarantee you, every single person listening to this can relate to this feeling of when you get hotter, things start to slow down, both from a cognitive perspective
Mhm.
and from a physical exertion perspective. And so, as David mentioned, when all of those things kind of happen, and it's like this perfect storm where we become more at risk for heat related injuries, illnesses, and accidents on the job, which is where things can go south pretty quickly. And a lot of people don't always think about this until something bad happens, until you see someone collapse. We know it's hard. We know we're struggling. We can see each other and ourselves sweating. But people aren't always aware of how severe exertional heat stroke can be if it's not recognized and treated properly.
Absolutely. So we
Mhm.
established that the issue is extreme heat. What are possible solutions? Are there any tools or resources business can use to mitigate that problem?
Oh, there's so many. I'm so glad you asked. So stay tuned. One of the many fact sheets that the two of us are working together on really try and help outline some of these heat mitigation strategies. So just as David mentioned, you have a take home, something that you can implement tomorrow. So at the Corey Stringer Institute, we've published quite a few resources and documents on this. Mainly, they have been led by Dr. Maggie Morrissey Basler. And we have all these different categories that we've kind of developed through this consensus document where we really bucket all the different heat mitigation strategies. Some of the biggest ones that you'll know are body cooling, which we're all pretty familiar with. If you put ice water on yourself or anything that is essentially colder than your skin, going to start to help you cool off. Hydration is a big one, right? If we go into work dehydrated, we're actually not even setting ourselves up to be as productive and successful as we could be when we're hydrated. There's a lot of data about dehydration and how that kind of negatively impacts our productivity at work. Having good heat hygiene is another one among heat acclimation. So simply just getting used to working under the stressors of how hot and humid it is outside, having an emergency action plan, so knowing what to do when things happen. I mean, there are so many heat mitigation strategies. And the truth is, what we found in the lab is the more of these strategies that you combine together, hydration, taking a break that's in the shade specifically, cooling your body down with cooling products, the better off you're going to be and the lower we can get that temperature sooner.
And if I could just add too, I think one thing that we're focused on is, we recognize these solutions exist. Of course, as it gets hotter, these will be more challenging. But as Gabby mentioned, we know how to protect people from heat-related illness. I think what's challenging is making a case for that in many organizations, because heat is sort of an invisible risk. Sometimes it's hot. It's been hot for a long time, and so why focus on it now? And so at the National Commission on Climate and Workforce Health, we have a number of resources that help with that. And so one example is we have a tool called the Climate Health Cost Forecaster, which we can hopefully link in the show notes, that helps employers quantify the healthcare cost impacts due to extreme climate events. So for instance, if you are an employer with a certain number of employees in Phoenix, you're likely going to have more related healthcare claims related to extreme heat, unless you do everything Gabby said and do everything perfectly. But we recognize that's hard for a lot of organizations. And so that forecaster can help start conversations, not just with an EHS team, but with a finance team or HR or benefits or operations, and sort of expand the conversation there. I should also mention AIHA has a great heat stress app as well that can be used as a scalable model there too. And the last one I will also plug is we've just done a lot of thinking about how to build an internal business case for investment, because these solutions cost money. They might be relatively inexpensive, but they cost time and money to protect people over time. And that is a conversation for sometimes executives. And so we've recently did a webinar focused on building a business case for action on extreme heat, which may be helpful too.
Perfect. And I appreciate mentioning Heat Stress app. That's always a great little feature to include.
Version 2 of the Heat Stress app is available now. Cutting-edge science to keep outdoor and now indoor workers safe. Available for Apple and Android. Scan the QR code to learn more.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how some of these resources are tailored to certain industries and how they can help those type of industries, such as, construction, warehousing, etc.?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So this is by far the hardest, but probably the most fun part of my job, to be completely honest. Every industry is different, and even within industries, companies operate differently. So that's why it's very challenging. People want blanket recommendations, and those can be great from, 50,000-foot view. But when you actually start and look at the logistics on the ground, who's operating, who's making the decisions, that's where we can actually start to tailor some of these strategies. So for construction, for example, a huge barrier that a lot of women in particular face is that they don't always have access to go to the bathroom, whereas it's a little bit easier for a guy, to just turn around and go to the bathroom a little bit easier. But the problem with that, and why I bring this up, is that individuals who don't have access to even basic restrooms actually won't drink fluid as frequently. They'll actually dehydrate themselves intentionally because they don't have a place where, they can go get rid of it. So a lot of unique challenges, but really one thing that you can do that is very effective across all of these is monitoring the environment. So when I mentioned that industries like construction, for example, there are kind of different hotspots even among a construction site. So if you have a set of workers, who are next to machinery or asphalt, something that's radiating heat, they're actually going to be at a greater risk than someone who is maybe working and doing something under the shade, who has more airflow and things along those lines. So what we really try and do with some of these resources is try and break down and get people to think about their hotspots and try and kind of compartmentalize the people and the jobs that are most at risk, because that's how you can actually start and take all these different resources and kind of personalize them based on that environment that person is working in.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, I don't have too much to add on that other than we've also recognized employers overall, they look for tailored guidance. And so there's people see them when people see themselves or their roles in some kind of tip sheets or improvement, they're more likely to use them. And so I think given the differences of these industries, it's really helpful. And we're going to encourage more uptake and more companies to take this seriously when they have access to these kinds of materials that is for them specifically and where they work and the kinds of roles that their employees are operating in. As I mentioned, the commission's resources are really focused on pulling all the experts in this field to recognize we actually know what works. The barrier to success here is getting more employers to implement and sustain new changes in their organization. The organizational psychology piece is just as hard as the physiology piece, I think. And so
Yes.
we have, Gabby agrees with that.
Yes.
The commission has a number of tip sheets on sector-wide on extreme heat, climate and mental health, and air quality. And we recognize that we're going to get more organizations to come in when we have more specific tailored tip sheets. And so right now, my team and Gabby's team are working on extreme heat tip sheets for agriculture and construction to start. And we've hopefully passed there. We might think about warehousing or airlines. There's a lot of other industries that face very specific risks. And so I also would love to hear from the audience here what might be helpful, because that could also inform our collaboration going forward. But we're hoping to publish those in the coming months, which will hopefully, might be past the peak heat of this summer right now, but it'll really help companies prepare for 2026 because these conversations need to happen during planning, during the winter when it's cooler, so folks can be protected and ready when it gets hot.
So on one side, we have resources available. The other side is more about the mindset. Can you tell me a little bit more about how can employers develop a health-forward climate mindset?
I think what we've noticed talking to employers overall about climate-driven risks of extreme heat is one of them, extreme weather, vector-borne disease. There's a whole sort of growing set of risks. It's really about engaging multiple functions in an organization. Right now, someone who's purely in charge of employee safety has probably thought about heat, and probably most of the folks on this podcast have probably thought about that as a risk. But what we've noticed is that might be just within that function. And someone who's an HR leader is probably not thinking about extreme heat. They have lots of other things to deal with in terms of benefits and employee engagement and retention and recruitment and whatnot. But heat drives all those things too. And that's what we're recognizing. And people might not be able to move to a place if it's going to be too hot, or they can't get flood insurance, or they can't get fire insurance. These risks are affecting the whole employee experience. And so our recommendation is pull together a cross-functional team that can talk about this to protect workers day to day, but also think pretty strategically long-term about what risks they face. One more thing I'll add to is I think, and Gabby's brought a lot of this energy as well, is have a take home, have something written down. Things on paper exist longer than things that are not on paper. And having written policies across teams can really help develop a mindset. So if someone leaves an organization or someone new comes in, this is just as embedded as other kinds of employee policies are too.
Yeah, that was perfect. David hit every single component of that. I think something that I've learned too, going around and talking to different companies, is that different categories, which I can explain in a second, pique the interest of different people who are involved. So when we talk about our research and what we do and how we get this information out to the public, like we're trying to do and are doing with these tip sheets, we can break this down into prevention. So what can you do, leading up to hopefully nothing bad happening, but what can you do day to day throughout a shift? Things like body cooling, hydration, all of those things. So that's kind of our prevention bucket that piques the interest of people because they want to feel better, they want to do better. And then you can also start talking about productivity metrics at work. So how much are we producing? How much did we get done today? Are things getting done on time? So that's one side of thing. But then the other side of things is the prevention, or not the prevention. It's the management of something when something happens. So how you manage an exertional heat stroke when it happens. So we have prevention and then we have treatment of, the exertional or the heat related injury or illness. And that will pique the attention of your safety managers, the people who have to deal with OSHA and not being compliant. And then also the cost. And of course, the unfortunate situation, if someone were to die, what does that look like? Obviously for that employee's family, but also for that company. And then unfortunately, you think about all of the PR and things that are associated with that. There are a lot of people on the business side who would never, like to deal with any of that. So again, those different buckets pique the interest of different people. And that's kind of how we tailor our conversations as well. So then we can, we're talking about the same thing. At the end of the day, we're talking about trying to get people to be healthier, happier, safer, cooler, and more productive at work. But then God forbid that one event does happen. Our hope is that every single company in America knows how to respond and how to at least start treatment and get the proper help so that you can do everything in your power to try and mitigate a death from occurring.
How can we, from step one, create a heat stress management plan, and how can we get to the finish line?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, first of all, call us if you need help. That's what we are here to do. First of all, I'll say it depends on what industry you're in. Probably everyone on this call is aware that there was a proposed federal heat standard. So because that is not implemented yet, there are different state regulations that different industries, different companies must abide by. So that's a good place to start. What are you mandated to do? And then they also vary by industry. So for example, there is a construction standard. So the tip sheet that David mentioned that we're putting together that is specific to those individuals, this fact sheet is essentially taking that standard, adding a little bit of our research as well, and kind of combining to have very tangible, guidelines that just anyone can read and digest and implement. So step one is obviously looking at what you need to comply with, following your regulations. Step two is then breaking out and creating a program that hits all of these different categories. First one that I like to talk about a lot is heat acclimation, or heat acclimatization is the proper term. A lot of people just call it heat acc. But how are you handling your workers who are brand new to the job, or maybe they are contractors who are brand new to just this environment? So maybe they work in Arizona, but they've never worked in the Florida humidity before. How are you also handling people that are returning from extended leave and long vacation? It is scientifically very well known that we can't just jump right into something and do it the exact same way that we've been doing it before when we've had time off. This is just like exercise. The same physiology applies here with heat stress as it does training. We can't just go run a marathon or, sprint a mile as fast as we can if we haven't been doing that consistently over time. So we need the literature says 7 to about 14 days to really acclimate ourselves. Most industries are pushing for at least 5 days. So that's one bucket. And then also building out your other buckets. So environmental monitoring is a huge one. And not just saying that because we're here, talking about AIHA, but truthfully, from a scientific perspective, monitoring the environment, being able to forecast what that day is going to look like, having a policy written down for that, whose job is it, and what are we doing with the data? And then the next step is then monitoring the environment locally. So on that construction site, for example, getting out right next to that worker, kind of as close as you can be to where all that radiant heat is coming up. What's the environment look like exactly for those people? So environmental monitoring is a huge bucket, and that's why this AIHA heat stress app is such a great tool to be able to start forecasting and manage all of these different sites that maybe one person is in charge of, but they can't physically get to every day. It helps people plan and can really help you mitigate a lot of heat-related injuries and illnesses from occurring if we can be proactive. You can also build out a component for body cooling if those resources are available to you. So something that we really try and emphasize is how can you maximize your rest break? Rest breaks should not just be telling people to go sit down and come back at X time. There needs to be fresh water, electrolytes available, body cooling if possible, and certainly shade. Air conditioning is best, but I've seen very few situations where a lot of workers have access to AC, and then being able to take off your PPE as well. So that's a whole nother bucket. And then arguably the most important component of a heat stress management plan is going to be your emergency procedures section. That's really where we shine and have really made a huge name for ourselves at the Corey Stringer Institute. We have a ton of resources on our website, but these resources will also be kind of adjusted and adapted to the occupational setting through these worksheets that we're going to be pushing out. So start with these big buckets, build out whatever you can based on your resources. But at absolute minimum, you need a plan for when something bad happens, because if you don't, you're going to end up in court. And my boss, the CEO of KSI, Dr. Douglas Casa, might be on the other side as expert witness, and can tell you that's not a fun situation from all of his stories. So you have to have a plan. You have to provide water, rest, and shade. And then anything else that you can do, within your budget and within your scope, is extra, and it does help.
Did you miss AIHA Connect 2025? Access the premier education programming of Connect 2025 for 1 year from the date of purchase. Purchase AIHA's 2025 full education package and earn up to 118.5 contact hours, all in one place. Scan the QR code to learn more.
So right now we're talking about the present. Let's talk more about the future. Let's say in 25 years. What does both organizations hope to achieve in 25 years? Big question.
That's a big timeline, Alejandro.
Yes.
I would, from my mind, I think what we've recognized, and I think most folks on this call will agree, is that the impacts we're seeing right now around heat and other risks are going to continue to get worse for most of that 25 years, if not longer. And so it's important to not only manage these risks right now and do all the things that Gabby has talked through for heat and other climate-driven risks, but also anticipate how else would this impact my workforce going forward. There's going to be different impacts in 2025 versus 2030 versus 2050. And so I envision a world, and maybe this is too optimistic, and where our companies and employers are thinking about these risks just as they think about their accounts and their finances, and they're measuring and managing all these different types of risks to their workers to keep their workers safe, but help their business. What ultimately we have discovered is that taking these actions and these investments to protect workers are actually very much in a business interest. This is not an impact only conversation we're having here. But that being said, it's hard to see that. And so my vision is that through the tools that we're creating together, the research that Gabby and her team have done, the reach and the expertise that we have on our commission, we can get every employer to really recognize we're in a new era now, and that demands a new way of thinking about measurement and management of climate-driven risks such as heat.
Wow, David, that was perfect. That was wonderful. So only a few things that I'll add to that from, I guess, the perspective of AIHA's Thermal Stress Working Group is something that we've learned is that industrial hygienists, safety managers, people who are making these decisions and either write or help execute a heat stress management plan, they wear a lot of hats. There are so many more hazards on a job, as all of you know, and it's not just heat. So how can we streamline and how can we make everything that, from my perspective as a scientist, how do I make everything I am recommending that they do easy and, practical to implement? So perfect example of that is this AIHA heat stress app. So a common barrier is logging online, literally computer, going to, a weather database and trying to figure out the WBGT or trying to implement a lot of different technologies. So the solution to that is if you have all of your locations on one app and you can just see everything very easily, you're able to manage more sites. Same thing with another, the actual monitor too, that we can get a specific value, a Kestrel 5400, perfect example of setting up multiple devices and then just getting a ping to your phone as well for notifications. So I think the dream is to be able to streamline everything for someone where they can make decisions essentially at the palm of their hand, and that it's one less thing for them to worry about. Because when you start to add too many things onto someone's plate, things slip through the cracks. And that is the last thing that we want to happen when we're trying to prevent someone from having a serious medical emergency like an exertional heat stroke.
So that wraps up today's episode of the AIHA Healthier Workplaces show. Gabrielle, David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
To learn more, visit the AIHA website and follow us on social media. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, remember that healthier workplaces mean a healthier world. Until next time.